Hey folks, Massenburg Studios over here. I figured I'd give you a brief glimpse into what it's like to write music for a video game. So today we're going to be writing a boss theme, so something, big and tense that would be underneath of a boss fight. So since this is a medieval RPG, I'm going to go with a more traditional classical orchestral interpretation for this track with a little extra elements added in there. First thing I'm going to do is build what's called a motor. A motor is that high energy, driving, pulsing, repetitive sequence of rhythms that happens underneath of a track that acts like a quote-unquote motor to help drive the track along and give it a little bit more oomph. So I'm feeling a 3-3-2 rhythmic vibe for this one, or a 3-3-3-3-4 rhythmic vibe for this one. You'll kind of get the gist of what I'm saying once I play with it and figure it out. Yeah, that'll work. Alright, so next I'm gonna start the A section of this piece and do a melody on top of the motor. Now, as I mentioned, since this is a medieval RPG, I've been featuring a lot of plucked folk instruments, so I typically default to either an oud or a mandolin for this, so I'm going to play with those and see which one makes the most sense here. It's too low. Yeah, that's going to be the right register for everything else that's going on. Yep, that's the one. Alright, now I'm going to loop this A section one more time here. But I'm going to add another texture on top of it so it doesn't sound like it's just the same thing over and over again. I'm thinking some blossoming string textures of some sort. I think would go really good on this. Yep, that's the one. If you noticed, I did actually end up adding that oud in the lower octave on top of the mandolin. This section, once I added the strings to it, needed a little bit more oomph to it in the melody spectrum, so I did double that melody in the oud down an octave from what the mandolin was doing. Alright, now on to the B section. So if you notice in the A section, I stayed on a pedal tone and didn't change the chord at all throughout the entire thing. So in this section, I'm going to introduce a little bit more chordal movement. I still want it to be, tense, but hopeful, if that kind of makes sense at all. I have a couple ideas that I usually do when I'm going for that vibe, so I'm going to apply them here and see which one sticks. That will do the trick. So what I did is I really emphasized the, for all you music nerds out there, the flat 6 to natural 6 movement in that, which kind of gives it that hopeful vibe, and even though it's still in a minor key, it kind of makes it feel like it's got a little bit of a major key going on in there. I think that's going to work really well. I did change the melody instrument to spice it up a little bit to a high woodwind section. I just need to go in there and edit it a little bit so it doesn't sound as much like it's a virtual instrument. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. Alright, now on to the C section. So this is going to be the big epic section where the full orchestra, all the bells and whistles, all that kind of stuff. I honestly kind of already had an idea in my head for what I was going to do for this. I kind of drafted it a little bit earlier. So now I just need to implement that into this and put it to full orchestra and voice it and orchestrate it, and we should be good to go there. Yeah, that sounds actually pretty darn good. So yeah, like I said, I already had the idea for what I was going to do for this section in particular before I even started writing this song. So I typically do high strings or some other high octave instrument to carry the melody during these bigger sections where it's full orchestra. But yeah, that worked pretty darn good if you ask me. All right, now time for the D section, which honestly I still want it to be big, just like the C section was, but I wanted to have a little bit different movement, whether that be chordal or rhythmic or whatever I end up deciding for what I want to do for this D section here. I'll be completely honest, I have no idea what I'm going to do here. So I'm probably going to sit here and listen to the C section a bunch of times until I can kind of figure out what in the heck I'm going to do here. Okay. I think I know what I'm going to do here. A little bit taboo, but I think it's actually going to fit this song quite well. So let's give it a shot here. All right, so I'm actually going to channel my inner jazz musician and do a 2-5-1 chord progression for this D section here. That's for all you music nerds out there. And I have no idea why, but I think it's going to work really well for the D section in this piece. So I'm going to go ahead and orchestrate that and see what happens. All right. Wow, that worked a lot better than I expected it to. Well, this piece is pretty much done besides the mixing and mastering and producing end of that, so fantastic. Thanks for being along with me on this journey.